There's a photograph that sits in a shoebox in northern Vermont. No one talks about it. No one frames it. But every generation knows exactly where it is. It shows a house at the edge of a forest, white clapboard siding, windows like black eyes, and in front of it, a family of 7, smiling, except for one. A girl, maybe 9 years old, standing at the far left. Her expression isn't fear. It isn't sadness. It's recognition, like she already knew what was coming. That photo was taken in the summer of 1977. By Christmas, 4 of them would be dead. 1 would vanish. And the girl on the left would spend the rest of her life refusing to speak about what happened in the woods behind that house. Her name was Catherine Lowe. And what she saw in Alder Ridge didn't just destroy her family. It revealed something far older. Something that had been waiting in those trees long before her bloodline ever arrived. This isn't a ghost story. It's not folklore. It's a case that was closed in 8 days, buried under a coroner's signature, in a town that wanted silence more than truth. But the forest kept records, and those records don't match what the state of Vermont told the public. What you're about to hear has been assembled from autopsy reports that were never released, journal entries found in a crawl space, and testimony from a detective who was removed from the case and warned never to speak again. He spoke anyway, 30 years later, 3 months before he died. This is the story of Alder Ridge, a place where a family went to heal, and where something in the woods decided they belonged to it instead. If you've ever felt watched in the wilderness, if you've ever heard something move behind you and turn to find nothing, you already know the feeling. Now imagine it never stops. Imagine it follows you home. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The Lowe family moved to Alder Ridge in June of 1977. They were running from something, though no one would say what. David Lowe, the father, had been a civil engineer in Boston. Respected, quiet. But somewhere in the spring of that year, something changed. His wife, Margaret, told her sister they needed to leave the city. That David had become obsessed with silence, with getting away from people. He'd bought the property sight unseen. 200 acres of dense Vermont woodland and a farmhouse that had been empty for 11 years. The realtor had been surprised anyone wanted it. The previous owner, a man named Earl Grimstead, had died in the house, alone. It took 3 weeks for anyone to find him. But David didn't care about history. He cared about isolation, and Alder Ridge gave him that. The house sat at the end of a dirt road that disappeared into the trees. No neighbors within 2 miles. No phone line. The closest town, Pittsfield, was a 40-minute drive, and even the locals avoided that road after dark. They had a name for the forest around the Lowe property. They called it the Fold, because things that went in had a habit of not coming back out the same way. The family arrived on a Saturday. David, Margaret, their 5 children. The oldest was 17. The youngest was Catherine, 9 years old. In the letters Margaret sent to her sister that summer, she described the move as a kind of resurrection. David was calmer. The children were exploring. They had space to breathe. But by August, the tone shifted. Margaret wrote that the children had stopped playing near the tree line. That they'd come back from the woods once, all of them, and refused to go past the clearing again. She said David had started walking the property at night, that he'd come back with mud on his hands and wouldn't say where he'd been, and she wrote something else, something her sister kept in a drawer for 40 years. She said the house felt like it was listening. On September 10th, Margaret stopped writing. On September 14th, the mailman found the front door open. No one answered when he called inside. He drove to town and returned with the sheriff. What they found would be listed as a murder, suicide. But the detective who worked the scene, a man named Robert Dannon, would later say that term was used because no one had the language for what actually happened. Because the scene didn't make sense, and because the forest had already started taking the evidence back. When Sheriff Hackett and the mailman entered the house, the first thing they noticed was the smell. Not decay, not yet. Something older, like wet earth and iron. The living room was untouched. The kitchen table was set for dinner, but no one had eaten. Upstairs, they found Margaret Lowe in the master bedroom. She was lying on the bed, fully clothed, hands folded across her chest. Her eyes were open. The coroner would later determine she died of acute cardiac arrest. No signs of trauma, no struggle. She was 41 years old. Her heart had simply stopped. In the next room, they found the 2 middle children, a boy 14 and a girl 12. Same position, same cause of death, lying on their backs, hands folded, eyes open. The oldest son, Daniel, was in the basement. He had hanged himself from a ceiling beam, but Detective Dannon would later note that the beam was only 6 feet high. Daniel was 5'10". His toes were touching the ground, and the rope around his neck had been tied in a way that wouldn't have caused unconsciousness quickly. It would have taken minutes, maybe longer. Daniel had stood there on his toes and waited. David Lowe was found outside, 200 yards into the tree line, kneeling. His hands were buried in the soil up to his wrists. His face was pressed into the ground. He had suffocated. But it wasn't the dirt that killed him. The autopsy showed his lungs were filled with something else, a black fungal substance. Organic, unidentified. The pathologist sent samples to 3 separate labs. None of them could classify it. It wasn't in any database. It wasn't supposed to exist. But here's the part that made Dannon pull his report and demand a state investigation. David's body had been kneeling there for at least 2 days. But his hands were warm when they found him, and there were finger marks in the soil around him. Fresh ones, like something had been digging with him, or pulling him down. The youngest daughter, Catherine, was found a quarter mile into the fold. She was sitting against a tree, unharmed, silent, staring back toward the house. When they tried to move her, she started screaming, not words, just sound. It took 3 adults to carry her out, and the entire time, she kept her eyes fixed on the forest behind them. She never looked away, not once. Catherine Lowe was placed in the care of her aunt in Massachusetts. She didn't speak for 6 months. When she finally did, it wasn't to explain what happened. It was to ask a single question. She asked if the woods had followed her. Her aunt thought it was trauma, grief. But Catherine wasn't asking metaphorically. She meant it literally. She would stand at the window of her aunt's house and stare at the tree line across the street. She refused to sleep with the window open. She wouldn't go outside after sunset. And twice her aunt woke in the middle of the night to find Catherine standing in the hallway, facing the back door, whispering the same thing over and over. She was saying, "It's still calling." By the time Catherine turned 18, she'd been in and out of 3 psychiatric facilities. The diagnosis was always the same: post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative episodes, survivor's guilt. But none of the doctors asked the right questions. None of them wanted to know what she'd actually seen, except one. In 1989, a researcher named Dr. Elliot Voss interviewed Catherine for a study on childhood trauma and memory. The interview was never published, but Voss kept the tapes. And in 2003, 2 years before he died, he sent copies to a journalist he trusted. On those tapes, Catherine describes what happened in the weeks leading up to her family's death. She said her father had found something in the woods. Not an object, a place. She called it the Hollow, a depression in the earth, about 10 feet across, surrounded by trees that had grown in a perfect circle. Catherine said her father became obsessed with it. He would sit at the edge of the hollow for hours. He told the children it was listening to him, that it knew things, that it had been waiting for someone to come back. Margaret tried to stop him. She begged him to leave the property. But David said it was too late, that they'd already been seen, and that the only way out was through. Catherine said the night before they died, her father gathered the family in the living room. He told them the hollow had made him an offer, that if they gave themselves to it willingly, they'd become part of something older than names, older than blood. Margaret had refused. She'd taken the children upstairs and locked the door, but Catherine said when she woke up the next morning, everyone was already gone. Not physically, they were still in the house. But they weren't themselves anymore. She said they moved wrong, they didn't blink. And when her mother looked at her, Catherine said it wasn't her mother looking back. It was something wearing her face. So Catherine ran. She ran into the woods, and the hollow let her go. But only because it wanted her to remember. It wanted someone to carry the story forward, because the hollow doesn't just take. It calls, and it's still calling. Detective Robert Dannon worked the Lowe case for 8 days. On the 9th day, he was told to close it. The state medical examiner had ruled it a family annihilation followed by suicide. Cause of death for the mother and 2 children was listed as sudden cardiac event, likely triggered by psychological shock. David Lowe's death was attributed to self-inflicted asphyxiation complicated by environmental factors. The fungal matter in his lungs was dismissed as post-mortem contamination. The case was sealed. Dannon was reassigned. But he kept copies, he kept his notes, and he kept asking questions. In 1998, he tracked down the land records for the Alder Ridge property. What he found made him sick. The Lowe family wasn't the first. The house had been built in 1904 by a family named Terrence. 7 people, all dead within 2 years. 'Cause unknown, in 1921, it was purchased by a widower named Hackett. He brought his 3 children. None of them made it to winter. In 1949, another family, the Bishops, 6 people gone in less than a year. Then Earl Grimstead in 1966, dead alone in the living room. Each time the deaths were written off, natural causes, accidents, madness. But each time the bodies were found in the same places: the bedrooms, the basement, the edge of the tree line. And each time there were reports of something in the woods, a presence, a sound, a smell like wet earth and rust. Dannon went back to Alder Ridge in 2001. He didn't go inside the house. He didn't need to. He walked to the spot where David Lowe had been found, and he found the hollow. It was still there, perfectly circular, ringed by trees that hadn't grown an inch in 24 years. The ground inside was black, soft, and warm. Dannon said when he knelt down and put his hand near the soil, he felt it. A pull. Not physical. Deeper than that. Like the ground was breathing. Like it recognized him. He left. He never went back. 3 months later, he sat down with a tape recorder and told the whole story. He said the state knew. He said they'd always known. That Alder Ridge wasn't the only place like this. That there were sites all over the country where the land had turned hungry, where something beneath the surface had woken up and started feeding, and that the only way it stayed quiet was if people stayed away. But people don't stay away. In 2014, the Alder Ridge property was sold again. A couple from New York. They wanted peace. They wanted silence. The realtor didn't mention the history. By law, he didn't have to. It had been more than 30 years. The couple moved in that summer. By October, they were gone. No forwarding address, no explanation. The house is still there. You can find it on satellite maps if you know where to look. The door is open. It's always open. And if you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have run like Catherine? Or would you have stayed and listened to what the hollow was offering? Because here's the thing no one wants to say out loud. Catherine Lowe is still alive. She's 76 years old now. And every few years, she gets a letter. No return address, no postmark. Just a single sentence written in soil on the inside of the envelope. It says we're still waiting. The case is closed. But the forest never forgot, and neither should you.